I published an article called Confessions of a Hopeless Optimist, which you can find on my website. I'm coming at you today to talk about how my thesis has developed in the last week. It's common for expert analysts to make inaccurate and overly negative predictions about a problem because they extrapolate the current problem into the future. They don't account for new developments. Usually their initial dire projections are progressively proven more and more wrong. So there's good news this week. The White House made news by projecting 100 to 240,000 US deaths from the virus. Of course, any loss of life is tragic, and the media made a big deal out of this. But remember that the Imperial College study, which most policymakers are using to guide their projections, predicted over 4 million deaths in the US. So this is wonderful news. The estimated death toll, which is put forth by the world's leading research institute, has now come down by 95% in just about 2 weeks. I personally expect to see this number revised downward again in coming weeks. The White House is also using a model from the Institute for Health Metrics to estimate hospital and healthcare needs. As of data reported midweek this week, this model predicted that 121,000 Americans would be hospitalized, while the actual reported number was 31,142. I also warned that the worst projections would be sensationalized by the media, who would only report the scariest news. This week, I was appalled at just how far the media will go to spread hysteria. CBS News admitted to using footage of an overflowing intensive care ward from Italy in a news piece describing New York hospitals. They represented that the Italian footage was taken in New York, which to me is beyond irresponsible. I remind everyone to be careful of the news you're consuming because there's a deliberate campaign to mislead us about the coronavirus. My main thesis is that in most crisis situations, the game gets changed by human ingenuity. And when faced with a problem, humans have a way of innovating a solution. So great news on this front this last week. Our ground war of social distancing has been grueling, but it does appear to be working. It looks like the number of new cases and deaths in Italy are starting to roll over. While the counts are still growing, they're growing at a slower rate than ever since the pandemic began. New cases peaked on March 21st and deaths peaked on March 27th, and both have been lower every day since. There are thousands of examples that the private economy has mobilized in an enormous way. Many manufacturers have retooled their factories to produce ventilators. In fact, Richard Branson had a bunch of actual rocket scientists sitting around in his space exploration business, so he repurposed them to innovate a new kind of ventilator, which can now be mass-produced at a cheaper price than ever. Researchers at Yale found a way to sterilize and recycle masks, and thousands of garment makers are shifting gears to manufacture protective garments. There's even a naval hospital ship floating in New York Harbor. Abbott Labs has developed home testing kits that produce results in 5 minutes instead of 5 days, and a team at the Icahn School of Medicine has developed the antibody test, which can tell if people have had the disease already, which is critically important information to guide our policy on the length of our quarantine. Johnson & Johnson announced that they have a vaccine they're highly confident will be effective, which is going to be tested and approved in record time. Every day, new therapeutic drugs are being developed thanks to the rapid identification of antibodies which are hoped to be effective. Yes, all of these drugs still require testing, but there have been scores of new announcements every day. Major advances are being made in the area of infusing blood from recovered patients to afflicted patients with promising results. And yes, the FDA approved the controversial drug chloroquine, and it is being administered as we speak. So the evidence on this drug is just anecdotal, but if the anecdotal reports are right, this drug could be highly effective. I encourage you to watch the interview this week that was done with Dr. Stephen Smith, who's been a respected infectious disease specialist for 20 years, who claimed that this drug is bringing about the beginning of the end of the pandemic. So if he's wrong, we should at least know within a few days, and at least the partisan bickering can end about this drug and we can move on to the next drug candidate. As for the stock market, the volatility continued this week. As of the time I'm speaking on Friday, the S&P 500 has largely held on to most of the 20% rally from last week, which I'll take as a win for now. But more importantly, I urge investors to remember, we are right now at a moment of maximum uncertainty. As with any crisis situation, the short to intermediate term outcomes are not just unknown, they are unknowable. However, the hallmark of all effective long-term investing is the practice of rationality under uncertainty. While there is no direct precedent for this pandemic in the lives of today's investors, there's certainly ample evidence of other terrifying events like the financial crisis of 2008, the September 11th attacks, or Black Monday back in 1987. Each of these crises spawned a similar moment of maximum uncertainty, but they were all followed by great economic expansions, together with unprecedented years of soaring equity values and dividends. I remind you that following its March 2009 low, down to 57%, the S&P 500 compounded at more than 14% annually for just about the next 11 years. You must look across the valley. We cannot know which way the equity market's next 25% move will go, but we know with crystal certainty which way its next 100% move will be. And I urge you, please do not risk missing it. Lastly, a new week brought an explosion of gratitude and an expression of the beauty of the human spirit. For those who are healthy and financially stable enough to put food on our table, we have a new opportunity to be thankful for our blessings. And we can all have our hearts touched by the thousands and thousands of stories of people who have used this crisis as an opportunity to go above and beyond to help their neighbors who are in need. Be of good cheer, my friends. This too will pass. And no matter what, nobody can argue with me that today we are 1 week closer to the end of this crisis than we were last Friday.